Well, we're very lucky here because we have quite a few Manets here at the National Gallery, and really one of the best here. We recognize her. There she is again. That's Victorine Meurent. One more time. This is the very last time she ever posed for him. So again, it looks like it's a scene of something he saw around Paris, but it's totally been recreated in the studio. Right? Fabricated. He's not painting it sitting outside the railway station, overlooking the railway yard. The view shows a nanny with her young charge, right? It's not a mother and daughter, probably. It's probably a hired nanny with the child she's babysitting. And she's getting some fresh air, taking her outside, got the kid's puppy on her lap, cutest dog in the National Gallery, one of them, and reading. And you'll notice she's got her fingers in the reading because people keep walking up like you and asking her, what's that you're reading? You know, which is the rudest thing, guys, that you can ever say to a woman who's reading in public. Because really, she's not reading so she can talk to you. You know? And here she's fine, okay, and she's got that same look on her face, doesn't she? She's like, really? Right? And very unimpressed. Like Olympia, unimpressed with our attempts to, spark some interest. Right? So she's got the puppy on her lap, she's got the book, and she's looking at you very directly again as her charge, the girl she's babysitting, is watching the train. And she's standing overlooking the railway yard. So the station is off to your left, and this is where the tracks come out of the station and spread out and move different directions. It's a huge opening in the earth, right? And so you just imagine that where the girl is, it drops down by about 30 feet. But he's not painting it right there. He's recreating it in the studio. Right? It's all a view that he sort of makes up and reposes using his favorite professional model. Now, I spent some time last time I was in Paris. I had to find it, right? That's my wife. But that's the Gare. That's where she is, right? That's where Victorine Meurent is sitting, is roughly here. And you can see he's recreated the iron bars. There's every chance they've been replaced since the 1870s as well. But it's Gare Saint-Lazare, and it can be recognized based on where he is. And this is a fairly new part of Paris. And that's kind of an important thing for the realist movement, is that they're focusing on things that are modern, really modern. And there was almost nothing as truly modern as a railway station. Railways didn't exist in Europe before around the 1830s. Is when we first start getting intercity rail service, where you could take a train from Paris to the suburbs, or from Paris to Brussels, right? That doesn't exist before the 1830s. So in 1874, this is really part of his lifetime. It didn't always exist, and it presents for us a very, very modern scene, right? Gare Saint-Lazare. And so you can see here from the barriers that it's quite a ways down to the railroad track. You don't get the steam anymore because of electricity, right? But you see the switching yard, and you even see down below, let's get the pen out, right, just down in here are the guys working the switching so that when the trains come in, they know what tracks to move into the station with. And so if we were here, right, they're sort of sitting back over here, right? Is where they are. So there's a road that comes across here. It's the biggest bridge anywhere. People came just to see this bridge because it's like, wow, really, a bridge over that much opening? And then around over here is down, and this is where that gate is on this side of that train, right? So that's where we're looking, back toward the station and across the tracks. And as you can see, this new railway yard, they had to clear a lot of Paris to build it. There had to be a lot of old neighborhood here that was torn down in order to put in the railway tracks. And this was part of a much bigger redevelopment of Paris that was happening during Manet's lifetime, Paris was changing before his eyes. The countryside outside Paris was changing before their eyes because industry had come. Right? Railways and connectivity between the suburbs and the towns outside the suburbs and the city center had only recently happened. So Gare Saint-Lazare, when we look at it, and it's one of 5 or 6 train stations at the time in Paris, cut out what used to be an old neighborhood, displaces all the people that were there, to gut it, to put in the railway tracks. And as you might imagine, not everybody thought this was a wonderful thing. Right? A lot of people thought modernity, great stuff. But other people thought, what happened to the Paris of my past? What happened to the Paris of my youth? Right? And you get those same sorts of ideas today, don't you? You know? People just say, things used to be so much better before they had the internet. You know, and things like that. Like, back to them preaching an old man, right? And get bitter about the way things used to be. Well, God, they just, what? The election in Paris yesterday, right? One candidate is about a Paris, France that used to be. That's changed through changing demographics, right? Another candidate is more about inclusiveness and globalism, right? Modernity. There's alternative ways of looking at this. So let's talk a little bit about the changing Paris. It's a rather important thing. So we looked before at the troubled history politically of France. The fact that they had not 1, not 2, but 3 revolutions, right? The first one, the famous one, right? 1789, inspired by ours. The second one, after Napoleon, after the restoration of the crown in 1830, right? Gave us Louis Philippe, known as a glutton. The third one, 1848, the last of the 3, right? Now, the third revolution, we haven't really talked about what happened after that, right? What happened with the third revolution? We did talk about the fact that coincides with the beginning of the realist movement. This interest in images of the working class coincides with the third revolution. And the reason is that the third revolution put the problems of the poor at the top of their to-do list. People were interested in the plight of the working class. And painters start to pick it up as a theme as well. Now again, Manet is different, right? He's not really working on the sort of rural impoverished workers. He's got the city. There's a lot more about relaxation, although arguably this is a woman at work. Arguably the Olympia is a woman at work. Right? They're still there as images of labor. But the thing that happens along with this is an increased interest in the city, and this is because Paris is changing. So what happened? And after the revolution, they decide so France had had one revolution, they got rid of the king. They wound up with Napoleon, an emperor. When he's out, then they go back to the idea of the kings. Second revolution, they tried constitutional monarchy, where the king's power is checked by parliament, like the Brits. That doesn't work either. Third revolution, presidents. Let's try presidents. Term limits. American style, right? Louis Philippe will be the first president, 1848, 4-year term. He's out by 1852, he can't do anything. Guess what happened? 1851, 3 years into his 4-year term, he has himself crowned emperor. Right? Total coup. Right? He's from the Napoleon family. What do you expect? Right? He becomes Emperor Napoleon III. Reigns from 1851 when he becomes emperor. Actually, it's all the way back to 1848, all the way through to 1870. What kicks him out? Not a revolution. The Germans, the Prussians, during the Franco-Prussian War, drives him from office, and France finally gets a rebel. Okay? Now, the reason I'm going back to this is that under Napoleon III, we have this move to try to modernize Paris. Right? the changes that are reflected in Manet's railway picture. Improve rail service, expand Gare du Nord. It more than doubled the number of tracks there during Napoleon III's reign. But more than that, modernize the city everywhere. Part of this is to solidify support for Napoleon III by giving people a more habitable city. This is when Paris became the Paris you know, if you've ever been. With the apartment buildings lighting, these broad, leafy streets, big, wide boulevards that link the major sites that go from the Opera House to the Arc de Triomphe, from the Arc de Triomphe to the Old Royal Palace, which is the Louvre, etc., etc., etc. This is all from Napoleon III. And what he did was he hired this guy named Haussmann, Baron Georges Haussmann, to redesign Paris, to cut these new boulevards with street lights and sewers, to eradicate disease from the old city streets that wandered and bent, being replaced by these big, broad boulevards that go straight. The air can flow. People will be healthier. This is all Napoleon's doing under Haussmann. So you might think, well, say what you will about dictators, he did something good for France. But there was an ulterior motive. The only way that the revolutions worked in 1830 and again in 1848 was because of the old wandering streets, the old medieval streets that weren't laid out, but just happened, that bent and twisted and came up on a little square, right? What they did during the revolution of 1848 and the previous design of the 18th century is they pulled up all the cobblestones and built walls, barricades on these tiny streets. And that's how a small handful of ragtag revolutionaries can fight against the imperial force. So you channel them down, right? You funnel them into a small space and then down the shot. Just say, what's going? It's easy, right? So Napoleon, hiring Haussmann, had an idea that not only going to give them what they want, bright lights, pretty streets, housing, sewers, but he got something in return, which is no more barricades, easy movement of troops if there's ever another uprising. Right? So what's happening, and this is the key part, the takeaway from this, what's happening is that during Napoleon III's reign, from the 1850s onward, France is changing. Paris is changing in front of people's eyes. The old Paris is disappearing, lock, stock, and barrel. And the new Paris is appearing. So Pissarro's work on the left is very much the new Paris. The Paris of the boulevards, replacing the Paris of the alleys and the small plazas and the tiny wandering streets. As you might imagine, like I said, not everybody likes this, right? This kind of change. A lot of people were disenfranchised. A lot of people were rendered homeless because of this. Forced to seek new housing out of the place where they had lived, their parents had lived, their grandparents had lived. They had to move. So, coming back to Manet, coming back to this picture, it's fascinating in that it's a picture of that battlefield, if you will, that part of Paris that people were arguing about. Whether it's positive or negative, whether it's good or it's bad, whether this change is helping or hurting. And Manet doesn't really let on. What is his point of view? This woman seems bored by it all. You know? The little girl seems fascinated. I like to think on some levels he's using the railway as an urban metaphor. This idea that, you're the person who's talked to her, is interrupted from her reading, but she's not given anything to you. not letting on. It's urban anonymity, in a way. You're like trains that pass, that don't acknowledge each other. So our railway is really part of this huge redesign. Those apartment buildings that we associate with Paris with the gray slate roofs are part of this redesign. This all takes place under Haussmann. Right? Now, complicating this, right? You might say, okay, great, so Manet is giving us this comment on the new Paris that has gutted the old Paris, that has dislocated people that used to live in this man-made valley. By the time Manet takes us in the 1870s, Napoleon III is out. He was kicked out of France by the Prussians, Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck. Wanted to unify Germany. Napoleon III stood in his way, so he invaded France to kick Napoleon III out, simply so that he could go back to Germany and try to pull Germany together. Right? So France didn't want a strong Germany. Long and short of it, right? Otto von Bismarck didn't give a rip about France. As soon as he invaded, he kind of pulled right back out again. He just wanted to form the third out of the way. He wasn't trying to invade to take it over. Right? So this is the Franco-Prussian War, 1870-1871. Prussians invade France to get Napoleon III out of office. In doing so, France is decimated. Absolutely destroyed. Part of the reason is that the city of Paris resisted the attack. Most of France fell quite quickly to the Prussians. But the city of Paris declared independence from the rest of France, called themselves the Communists, and held out against the Germans, held out against the Prussians, until they sent the forces in double strength. Wiped out 30,000 people in a couple of months. Right? Destroyed the city. And then left. Because they achieved what they wanted to, which was to get Napoleon III out of the way. That took place 1870, 1871. Then it came 3 years later. France is in a period of rebuilding. Can we look at images of industrial progress and think about them as images of a country on the rebound? This is really kind of an interesting issue because there isn't a solid answer here. I'm giving you two different ways of looking at the picture. And you can find writers out there who think either of these two points of view. One, progress bad. In fact, almost every picture we've looked at has been a landscape, an outdoor picture, where there's been images of progress. It's look down, Think on, if you look at, if you play the romantic landscape section that we put up online a week ago, artists look at the landscape as a place to go to get away from the city, right? And usually that progress is seen as something that gets in the way of our being in touch with who we really are. But here, there's this big possibility that progress, as represented by the railway, can be a positive thing. Because during the period, when France is doing its darndest to rebuild itself after a humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. So, as you read these pictures, you have to think about the historical context and use that to try to come to some conclusion about what these things mean, or might have been to people solve the time. So, what it gives us as a realist picture is an image of contemporary France. The thing that critics started calling for in the 1840s and really fed this realist movement. Now, the realist movement basically morphs into Impressionism. Impressionism grows out of the realist movement. This is why you see a lot of people wrongly call Manet an Impressionist. He's not. But the Impressionist movement inherits a lot of what the realist movement was doing. In particular, this question about industry, the modern world. If you're going to paint the modern world, what is your attitude toward the modern world? What is your attitude toward, in this case, industrial progress? Right? We'll talk about that. But let's first talk about Impressionism. Impressionism was founded in 1873, right? The year before Manet paints the railway. 1873. A group of around 30 painters who, like Manet, had been regularly rejected from the salon. Got tired of trying to work with these traditionalist critics, right? They got tired of trying to get their works accepted to the salon, and they decided instead to form an independent society of artists who would mount their own exhibitions, no juries, where their works would then be seen by the public and appreciated for what they were, rather than rejected by a bunch of out-of-touch critics. And they mounted their very first exhibition, their very first group show, 2 weeks before the Salon in 1874. In other words, specifically to stick their finger in the eye of the Academy. Right? 2 weeks in advance of the big Salon, they have their own show. And they get a lot of people show up. Monet's Impression Sunrise is in the show. Now, the group, at that point, was simply called the Anonymous Society of Artists, right? Or Independent Society of Artists. The reviews of the show latched onto Monet's painting and nicknamed the group the Impressionists. Right? So this is the reason why we call them Impressionists. We'll talk more about what it all means in a second. They asked Manet to join them. Manet and Monet are good friends. Manet comes from the well-heeled part of society. He's got money. He helps pay for lunch a lot. He's friends with all of these artists who are getting their works rejected from the salon on a regular basis as well. And they ask him, join us. Heck with them. Manet says, no, I don't want to join you. You guys are friends and all, but I want to keep putting my works into the salon. I believe in it as an institution. So, is Manet an Impressionist? He shares a lot with them, so do other realist artists. But when he was asked to join the group, he said no. He's not an Impressionist. He chose not to be. Okay? So, these two works really are interesting in that they are on either side of this big show in 1874. Monet's show is in the Impressionist show that opens in the early part of April. Manet's Railway in the Salon, the official Salon that opens 2 weeks later. Right. Now, what is Impressionism? The way we've come to know it is based on a few artists. But this group of 30 artists had no sort of litmus test. You didn't have to paint like Monet to be in the group. And he's the most famous of them, as are a number of artists who paint like him. One of the things that the group tends to share is this ongoing interest in modern France. Okay, they got that from the realists, okay? But in addition to that, a sort of sketchy approach. They got that from Manet. Right? Brush strokes that seem immediate and sketch-like and not blended on the surface of the canvas. Add to this a new approach to painting. They paint outside. in French, en plein air, in full light, in full atmosphere. They took their canvases outside and they painted the finished work in the out of doors, or at least the majority of it. This is something Manet never did. This is something that all of our landscape artists up to this point never did. Constable, Turner, 17th century, right? Claude Lorrain, Van Ruijsdael, Rembrandt, none of them ever painted outside. This is new. Painting en plein air. And as they're painting en plein air, the reason they want to paint outside is they're trying to capture the effects of light. Almost as if that's the major theme at hand. Even though it's about, the painting illustrates a part of industrial Paris, the title suggests the fleeting moment during the sunrise, right? An impression, not a study, right? Not a resolution, an impression, something that happens quickly, a moment of light. That would be different 5 minutes earlier, different 5 minutes later. And the way that Monet applies the paint, which he borrowed from Manet, gives it that immediacy. Right? It's not resolved. It just happens once. You can even see the bare canvas through parts of the paint. Right? So this is kind of what Impressionism is, this idea of the effects of light. Painted outside where they can see it directly. Still looking at the world around them like the realists were, but shifting that focus to share it with this interest in the changing effects of light. Now, what does Monet depict here? What has he chosen as the subject matter? This is the town of Le Havre, which simply means the harbor in French. It's where the river Seine, as it flows out of Paris, dumps into the North Sea. Right? It's the mouth of the Seine River. And it's where Monet grew up. So in 1872, he's gone back to his childhood town, city, and he's painting it there. And he's giving us a view over the major opening to the harbor, where you can see in the background we have, through the haze, the morning haze, we can make out large masted ships, but we can also make out cranes for loading and unloading those ships on the right. And we can also make out smokestacks, belching steam, that add to the haze that we're looking at that makes that sun so pretty and orange. Right? It's a painting of smog. It's a painting of a big, busy industrial harbor. In other words, the painting is something absolutely modern, absolutely new, and maybe not particularly beautiful in and of itself. Belching smokestacks. Right? And amid all of this industry that we see through the haze, as we look our way back toward the sun, we have in the foreground two little boats full of guys. The little non-industrial fishermen going out at the beginning of the day. There's this juxtaposition between big shipping industry and the little guy, the small independent fisherman. And it almost suggests that maybe again there's that possibility of reading it two very different ways. One, these are the guys being crowded out by the changes that industry has brought. Or, in a period after the Franco-Prussian War, this is a city or a country that's reviving, rebuilding, coming back to life, sunrise as a metaphor. The images of modern life bring with them a way of looking at the world at a point of view. And the question is, how do we figure out what that is? Or does Monet decide to try to leave it open-ended? A lot of his pictures focus on industry, right? Here's Gare Saint-Lazare again, the same one we saw with Manet as we started off the evening. Right, we're now inside the train shed looking out. There are some of Haussmann's buildings beyond the steam of the engine that's pulling in and releasing its brakes. Right, the Manet girl would have been sort of seated over here, overlooking the train yard. In this picture, this is one of a series of, I think, 7 of these that he did in 1877, where again he's trying to capture the changes in light inside this modern, man-made environment. It's as modern as it could be. To us it looks old, but in 1877, this is the new train shed. No one had ever seen an interior space as big as this. It's all glass and steel, modern building materials. It's also a place that Monet knew really, really well, because he lived in a small town outside of Paris, and when he came into Paris, this was his train station. This was the train station that serviced his hometown. He lived in the town of Argenteuil, which we see reflected in this picture on the left from the National Gallery. He liked Argenteuil because on the Seine, the river got really wide, the light was really terrific, the reflections of the light, and that seems to be exactly what he's focusing on here, are the reflections of light. We're looking out over the sun-dappled river. We see a brand new bridge on the right-hand side. We see the light of the water reflecting up off of the cement of the bridge. The stove, pick up the colors of the water as it reflects up on it. There's almost a sense of wonder as we look at the railway bridge. Not only how it catches the light from the water, almost like the walls of a cathedral with stained glass, but also how, in addition to providing road service across the river, it also provides a really wonderful vantage point to look out over the water. People taking advantage of this. And there's this question again of what kind of interpretation is Monet making of this? How does he see the road bridge? Is it a good thing? Is it a nice addition to his hometown of Argenteuil? Because it's a new bridge after all. Or is it an eyesore? Does it clog the landscape? He focuses on it so often, I think he must have liked it. I think he would take the point of view of those people up on the bridge. Because as we look at the waters here, we see 3 different sizes of boat, don't we? 4 if we count the boat that's cut off in the foreground, we just see the mast, right? But we have this sort of almost a peaceful coexistence between the people enjoying their water sports on the Seine itself, and that massive bridge nearby. It seems not to have gotten in the way or disrupted much of anything, even this couple on a little rowboat almost in the shadow of the bridge. Everything seems pretty harmonious. But as an Impressionist work, he's very much interested in not only the open brushwork that we saw Manet begin to work with, but also using that to create a very strong feeling of what the light felt like at a very particular moment. And he achieved this by painting outside. Now, as I mentioned, he's part of a group of artists. There are 30 of them or so that are part of this group that gets to be known as the Impressionists. Right? Edgar Degas was a founding member. He was part of that original group of 30. And what's interesting about Degas, he doesn't do many landscapes, and he very rarely paints outdoors. In fact, the majority of his works are interior scenes, and they are often of people gainfully employed at something. In fact, when the group was called the Impressionists, Degas got angry. He said, there's nothing impressionistic about my work. It's all very deliberate. And that if you want to call me something, you should call me a realist. And it certainly points to that transition between the two, and the fact that there's not really much of a boundary between the realists on the one hand and the impressionists on the other. With that in mind, Degas' subject matter. There are three basic subjects that Degas loves. One of them is ballerinas. It's what he's most famous for, these images of the ballet. Now, the ballet in the 19th century is not what it is today. There's no sort of, Black Swan, prima donna sort of idea. This is hard work. I guess it probably still is hard work. I have no way of knowing. But it was considered to be very hard work, and the people who worked in ballet classes often came from broken homes, orphanages. They were considered to be the grunts of the theater world. In fact, that's what they were called. Theater grunts or theater rats. They relied on people to support them, but they came from impoverished backgrounds, usually working class backgrounds. And Degas usually always shows them hard at work, or sometimes taking a break from work, but rarely actually performing. Instead, studying, getting better, working at it. What makes him an impressionist? Well, he's part of the group, one. But two, that open brushwork, that lack of blending of the paint that we saw with Manet, that we saw with Monet. Unlike Monet, he's interested in light. Unlike Manet, he's interested in light. This is something all of the Impressionists were interested in. And if you look at the dance class picture, you can see the way the light floods in through the window and around the legs of the dancers practicing and across the floorboards into the foreground. That changing nature of light is as much a part of the picture as the actual dance itself. And he achieves it through this open brushwork. It also is very spontaneous, almost as if he didn't plan it out, almost as if it was a snapshot, a photograph, shot from the hip. And he achieves this not only through the brushwork and the fall of light, but also through the cropping. Notice how many figures in the entire composition break through the frame, right? Disappear off of the canvas. This is true on the far right, where you can see a figure sort of cut off on the right-hand border, the one who has her leg up, foot up on that chair, but her arm is cut off by the border, and even more on the left-hand side, where you get this really fascinating blocking of the scene. You have a series of legs pattering down the spiral staircase, but then there's the way that staircase totally blocks the view of the people behind it. So there's always just these dismembered legs almost, right? Two down below here, back in the back, kicking behind, right? It's almost like too many legs for as many women would actually be there. And it's achieved through this almost haphazard or random viewpoint that he's taken that blocks a lot of the different views. Degas loves that. And for him, it adds to the sense of spontaneity. It adds to the sense of being quickly done, not formally arranged, not contained by the edges of the canvas. Another picture that has that sort of casual arrangement and cropping, also in the National Gallery, shows these figures arranged back into space, but again cropped by the frame, not contained. And a lot of the composition given over to that broad, flat wall, the green wall, or the opening of the floor. We still allows the light to flood in, still allows them to focus on that, but at the same time has that sort of casual, open arrangement of the different forms that doesn't have your classical sense of balance, of being focused on a center part. Now, where is Degas getting this idea? These casual arrangements. This something that's an important impact and influence on the Impressionists. He's looking at Japanese art. Beginning in the 1850s, and from that point forward, Western artists are trying to figure out new ways of approaching art, ways that break away from the traditions of the Renaissance, the traditions of Western art that they see to be kind of tired and spent, and not the best way to depict the modern world. A lot of them begin to look at prints coming in from Japan, artworks coming in from all over Asia. Hiroshige seems to have been one of the major influences on the Impressionists. He does these images. This is a series of the stations of Tokyo, places where transit comes and goes. And you'll notice as the boats come in that pier blocks figures. Right? It seems sort of dramatically posed to get in the way of what we're supposed to be looking at. Degas does very, very much the same thing. Our last Impressionist, we could certainly spend a lot of time looking at them, but the last one that we'll look at today is Mary Cassatt. She's an American from Philadelphia, and her family had moved to Paris on business in 1866. She went along as a little girl. This is not her, right? But she went along as a youth and started to paint while she was in Paris. Degas saw her pictures and asked her to join the Impressionist group. Since the Impressionists were breaking all of the rules of art and set up to be independent from those rules, one of the other rules that they broke was a ban on women artists. It wasn't a physical ban on women artists, but they were banned from studying. They were banned from using the male model. They were banned from the schools. So for Cassatt, the Impressionists must have been a godsend. And Degas welcomed her in. She showed at most of the shows from the 1870s onward. We've got quite a few here. This is one of my faves in the entire National Gallery. It's just a fantastic picture of a little girl at home. What's her attitude? Samantha, you're smiling. Huh? Yeah, is she rushed in there? You think? She wants to just kind of, she's done, right? I am done. Do you agree, Samantha, with all of that? Yeah? Look at the way she's sitting. I always get the sense that she's kind of squirming as well. You know? She's laying there, but, she's not entirely comfortable as she's laying there, right? She's got her hand. Have you ever seen kids who would rather go outside? And the way they sort of fidget on a couch. I think she's totally sconced in there, but I think she kind of has to be on a certain level. And I get the sense from the look on her, look at her face. Right? You're doing it, Sean, right? It's like, okay, I guess I'll sit here if I have to. Right? Fine. But the dog, on the other hand, right? That's comfortable. Right? That's sconced in there. But there's something about her with her arm off to the side, and she's sort of like begrudgingly sunk into that amazing blue armchair. And we have around her the rest of this furniture, right? But we also have this symbol of the world outside, the light coming in through the windows. That could change everything. Now, the reason I think this is realistic is that in the 19th century, we were just talking about how Cassatt, as a woman artist, wouldn't have had the same advantages that they wanted, because she couldn't join the academy, because she couldn't take art lessons. This is why there's so few women artists at the time, is that most of them simply did not have the opportunity that male artists. She also, Cassatt, did not have this opportunity to go set up an easel outside to paint en plein air. Because in 19th century France, any woman outside by herself was fun. That's how men viewed that, even if they weren't. It was taboo. It's not something they could simply do. So most of Cassat's pictures, not all of them, but most, are domestic scenes inside. Women who have to stay in. Because they don't have the same opportunity to walk around, to enjoy the city like the men do. They can go out and accompany, right, as a couple, but they can't just go out on their own. Because they become the scourge of men who say rude things to them. So our little girl here, I think, knowing that about France in the 19th century, knowing that about Cassat's experience, makes me think that our little girl loves to be outside. But she has to stand. The rules don't allow it. We won't go there, right? So to go back, for example, to Manet, there's a working woman. She's a nanny. She can be outside because she's got a reason to. But the idea of walking around the city and simply enjoying it, which is what French people did often, was something that was not available to women. So it's very, very hard for a woman to be an impressionist artist. As an impressionist is someone who's going out and trying to capture the changing light by setting up an easel outside. It's very, very difficult. And knowing that about the period, I think, helps us to think more about this girl and what might be going through her head, or what might be going through Mary Cassat. I got one more picture about Cassat from this same time period. Like I mentioned, she was very, very good friends with Degas. This is Cassat. She and Degas often went to the museum together. And here she is looking at pictures. It might look like she's shopping, but that's in fact the museum. Those are frames on the wall that she's looking at. So this wonderful picture of her seen from behind. Like I mentioned, Degas took to her rather closely and was able to help her succeed, even if French society didn't allow her to get out on her own quite as often. As we continue to work our way through Impressionism, we get to a period in the 1880s and the 1890s where things start to look different from the original group of Impressionists. And in the 1920s, art historians noticed that these Impressionists working in the 1880s and 90s were moving in new directions. Now, they still focus on contemporary life. That's the legacy of realism. They're focusing on modern Paris, aspects of living in the modern city. But they're breaking with traditional Impressionist ideas. And so in the 1920s, this group of artists, Louis-Lautrec is one of them, pick up a new label, I don't have it up here, called Post-Impressionism. That was given to them in the 1920s. Many of them were part of the group, but they're doing something so different that they're seen as being a sort of different movement. Now, the rest of the class tonight, we'll talk about what that is. These last 5 minutes, we'll begin to talk about what that is. What is Post-Impressionism? It's not a single direction. It's not a single movement. It shares certain things with Impressionism, but the artists are doing interesting, different things. In each of these, I want you to pay attention to a couple of sort of strange things. One, you'll notice that Toulouse-Lautrec depicts people almost as if they're cartoons. They look more like caricatures. The guy in the bowler hat, for example, the group at the table on the right. The colors he chooses are extraordinary. They're not at all descriptive. In the same way, the facial structures aren't really what he sees so much as what he feels. Right? They become much more expressive. We still have interesting modern compositions with things cut off from the side. But we also have these coats with these sleeves, these amazing outlines, right? This one here, right? That become cartoon-like, right? Become caricature-like. Impressionists were almost always very descriptive. Everything was objective. They were trying to capture on the canvas what light looked like at a particular time. If you get in close, the brushwork is all broken up, but you back away and your eye blends it together and it looks like what they saw. The colors resemble the colors that they saw. This disappears at Toulouse-Lautrec. And we get colors being used for expressive means. This is nowhere more apparent than the woman on the right, with that sort of Frankenstein face and the bright orange hair. She's being lit by the floodlights in this cabaret, which give her that color, but Toulouse-Lautrec enhances it for a greater expressiveness. This subjectivity, right, rather than an objective view, is one of the things that critics pointed to in saying that art was different in the 1890s, that art had moved somewhere new, that we're talking about post-impressionism. This subjectivity goes hand in hand with what we know about Toulouse-Lautrec. He came from a very, very wealthy family. His parents were landed gentry. In other words, they were counts. Going back all the way to the 12th century, the family has been lords in the old feudal system. But his parents were cousins, and we've heard about this before. What happens? Toulouse-Lautrec was born with birth defects because of the bloodline being too close. He had incredibly weak bones. When he was 12 years old, he shattered one of his thighs. And the next year, he shattered the other one, and they both stopped growing. He never stood higher than about yay, right? 3.5, maybe 4 feet, right? And it's not because he was a dwarf or a midget, it was because his legs had stopped growing because of this accident. It stunted and crippled him. This is him back here. The little guy in the bowler hat is Toulouse-Lautrec. Right? He moved to the region that we see here in the picture, which is called the Montmartre, the Martyr's Mouth. This is where all of the great cabarets in France are. And Toulouse is quite dangerous as well. Even to this day, there's areas of it that are pretty dangerous. It's where prostitutes hung out, it's where criminals hung out, where these amazing bars and cabarets were as well. And Toulouse-Lautrec is basically slumming it. He's giving us these autobiographical pictures of his life. These are the people he knew. These are the places he hung out. So when we talk about the fact that post-impressionist art is subjective rather than objective, we're starting to see something here which is a new take on realism. Art as autobiography, rather than simply depicting the world around you, the Paris that is there. Okay, we'll quit there. We'll pick up Van Gogh and post-impressionism and move into actually the 20th century on whatever the next day we meet, Thursday is, right? So again, if you got here late, there's a review sheet up online for the final, so you can begin to work on that if you need to, and I think that's all I announced at the beginning. So I'll see you guys on Thursday.